Aliens promised to protect Earth. Humans just smirked and whispered, "Really?" Part 1. The sky above Houston split open without warning. It was not an explosion, not a storm, not anything the weather satellites had predicted. One moment, the afternoon sun hung lazy and warm over the city's skyline. The next, a shape appeared, vast, smooth, and black as deep space. It hung there, silent and still, blocking out stars no one had even been looking at. People stopped in the streets. Cars slowed to a crawl. Phones filled with shaky videos that would crash servers within the hour. In a small apartment near the university, Kyle Bennett stood by his window with a half-finished cup of coffee in his hand. He was an aerospace engineer, not a soldier or a politician, but he knew enough to recognize that this thing was not human. It had no wings, no engines, no visible ports or markings. It just was, and it was huge. Bigger than any space station ever built. Bigger than a city block turned sideways and shoved into the sky. He didn't panic. He didn't scream. He just took a slow sip of coffee, set the mug down and muttered, "Well, that's new." Meanwhile, in Portland, Maya Ruiz sat in her favorite corner of the rainy day cafe, grading linguistics papers. The bell above the door jingled as someone rushed in, breathless, pointing at the sky. Within seconds, every phone in the place buzzed at once. Maya looked up from her red pen just as the TV behind the counter flickered to life. A news anchor, pale and wide-eyed, stammered through a breaking report. An unidentified object. In low Earth orbit. No nation claims responsibility. Maya pushed her glasses up her nose and watched the live feed. The object, now called the Visitor by news outlets, hovered calmly over the equator. Then, without warning, a voice filled every speaker on the planet. Radios, televisions, smartphones, even emergency broadcast systems, all carried the same calm, measured tone. It spoke English, but with no accent, no emotion, just clarity. "We are the Varel," it said. "We have watched your world for 312 of your years. You are young. You are loud. You are bright with potential. But you are not yet safe." The voice paused, as if giving humanity time to breathe. "We offer protection from threats beyond your sky, from dangers you cannot yet see. We ask only for peace, cooperation, and access to your stories, your art, your history, your songs." Then the transmission ended. Silence returned, heavier than before. Governments scrambled. The United Nations called an emergency session. Militaries locked onto the object with radar and missiles, but no one fired. No one dared. Scientists argued over whether the Varel were real or a hoax. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was a NASA stunt. Religious leaders called it a sign. Children drew pictures of the black ship in crayon. Kyle watched the replay 3 times. He wasn't impressed by the grand speech. What caught his attention was the physics. The ship hadn't entered orbit like anything human-made. It hadn't decelerated. It hadn't burned up. It had just appeared. That broke too many laws. Either the Varel had mastered space-time in ways humans couldn't grasp, or they were lying about something fundamental. He texted a friend at NASA. "Did your sensors pick up any gravitational ripple before it showed up?" The reply came fast. "Nothing. Like it blinked into existence." Kyle frowned. That wasn't protection. That was magic. And magic made him nervous. In New Mexico, Leo Grant stood on his porch at 3 a.m, telescope pointed upward. He wasn't a professional astronomer, just a retired mechanic who loved the stars. But he knew the night sky like the back of his grease-stained hands. And tonight, something was wrong. The stars near the Varel ship shimmered oddly, like heat haze over desert asphalt. He adjusted his lens, snapped a photo, and zoomed in. The image showed faint ripples in the starlight, bending in ways that shouldn't happen without massive gravity. "That's not right," he whispered to his dog, a scruffy mutt named Comet back in Houston. Kyle turned off the TV. The news was full of politicians praising the Varel's generosity, calling it a turning point for humanity. But Kyle kept thinking about the silence before the voice spoke. No handshake. No warning. Just an announcement. Like a parent telling a child, "I'm taking over now." He walked to his workbench where half-built drone parts lay scattered. He picked up a circuit board and turned it slowly in his hands. "If they're so peaceful," he said to no one, "why do they feel like they're already in charge?" In Portland, Maya closed her laptop. The cafe had emptied out. Everyone glued to their screens or rushing home. She lingered, staring at her cold tea. She'd spent years studying how language shapes thought. And the Varel's message, it was too perfect. Too smooth. It used words like protection and cooperation, but the structure felt off, like a sales pitch dressed as a gift. She pulled out her notebook and scribbled, "They didn't ask if we wanted help. They told us we needed it." That night, the Varel ship released smaller craft, dozens of them gliding down to every continent. They landed gently in open fields, outside capitals near research centers. Each one carried a single Varel envoy, tall and slender, with skin like polished stone and eyes that glowed faintly blue. They moved with calm grace, speaking through translators that hung in the air like floating glass beads. In Geneva, the lead envoy, named Kalen, stood before the United Nations. "We mean no harm," he said, his voice echoing softly in the Great Hall. "We only wish to ensure your survival." The delegates applauded. Cameras flashed. Treaties were drafted by dawn. But in Houston, Kyle watched the footage and saw something others missed. When Kalen gestured, his fingers moved in precise repeating patterns like code. And the translator bead didn't just speak. It watched. Its surface reflected the room, but not quite right. The angles were wrong. It was recording everything. Kyle leaned back in his chair. "They're not here to protect us," he murmured. "They're here to study us." And in Portland, Maya looked up at the night sky through her apartment window. The black ship hung there, unmoving, like a question mark with no answer. She smiled faintly, shook her head, and whispered, "Really? Aliens promised to protect Earth." Humans just smirked and whispered, "Really?" Part 2, the Varel moved fast. Within weeks, their defense platforms, smooth, disc-shaped structures no bigger than a football field, orbited Earth at key points. They hummed softly, invisible to the naked eye but detectable by radar. Scientists called them guardian nodes. The Varel called them shields. Governments called them a miracle. Most people just felt safer. Crime dropped. Stock markets rose. For the first time in decades, the world seemed united under a single promise. You are no longer alone. But not everyone believed. In a secure conference room beneath NATO headquarters in Brussels, Colonel Derek Shaw sat with his arms crossed, listening to diplomats praise the Varel's generosity. He was a quiet man, mid-40s, with a scar above his left eyebrow from a training accident in Afghanistan. He didn't trust easy answers. When the Varel ambassador Kalen offered to share non-lethal energy principles with human engineers, Derek leaned forward and asked, "Why non-lethal? Are you afraid we'll use it against you?" The room went silent. Kalen tilted his head slightly as if puzzled. "We have no enemies," he replied. "Only students." Derek didn't smile. He just nodded and sat back. But inside, alarms rang. Students don't get to choose their teachers, and teachers don't show up uninvited with shields. Meanwhile, in Houston, Kyle Bennett received a package. No return address. Just a small metal box with a Varel symbol stamped on the lid. Inside was a shard of black material, lightweight, cool to the touch, and humming faintly. A note in neat handwriting read, "Found near Relay Station Delta. Thought you'd want to see it." It was signed with initials LG Leo Grant, the mechanic from New Mexico. Kyle spent 3 nights testing the shard. It didn't respond to magnets, heat, or electricity. But when he played a specific frequency through a speaker, a tone he'd reverse-engineered from Varel translator sounds, the shard pulsed with soft blue light. More than that, it bent nearby radio waves, not blocked them, bent them. Like a lens, he called Leo. "You sure this came from their gear?" "Pulled it off a drone that crashed during a sandstorm," Leo said. "They never came back for it." Weird, right? Kyle didn't answer right away. He was thinking. If the Varel could control electromagnetic fields that precisely, they could hide anything. Ships, signals, even people. In Portland, Maya Ruiz accepted a temporary position as a cultural liaison for the Varel. Her job was simple: collect human stories, folktales, poems, songs, and translate them into data the Varel could understand. She worked from a small office near the local envoy station. Every day she handed over digital archives on flash drives. Every night she copied everything before she turned it in. She noticed things. The Varel didn't ask for war stories. They skipped over tales of rebellion, sacrifice, or clever tricks. They loved lullabies. They adored myths about harmony with nature. They requested every version of the tortoise and the hare from every culture on Earth. "They're filtering us," she told her roommate over dinner. "They only want the parts that make us look gentle." Her roommate laughed. "Maybe they just like bedtime stories." Maya didn't laugh. She remembered how Kalen had described humanity. Young, loud, bright with potential. It sounded kind, but it also sounded like someone describing a pet. Back in Brussels, Derek pushed harder. He requested access to one of the Guardian nodes. The Varel refused politely. Your technology is not yet compatible, Kalen explained. Interference could be dangerous. Derek asked for sensor logs. Denied. He asked for maintenance schedules. Denied again. Finally, he asked a simple question at a public forum. If these shields are for our protection, why won't you let us verify they work? Kalen's reply was calm. Would you ask a child to inspect the locks on its own crib? The audience chuckled. Derek did not. That night, he met with a small group of intelligence officers from 5 countries. They shared what they'd found. Strange power dips in regions near Varel outposts, encrypted data streams leaving Earth daily, and a growing list of missing persons, always near Varel sites, always dismissed as runaways or accidents. They're not scanning us, one analyst said. They're cataloging us. In Detroit, a team of retired engineers, led by a woman named Claire Mitchell, started building signal jammers from old car parts and microwave ovens. They didn't know why. They just felt watched. When a Varel drone hovered over their neighborhood for 6 hours straight, Claire pointed a homemade antenna at it and blasted it with static. The drone twitched, spun once, and flew away. She grinned. Guess they don't like noise. Kyle heard about Claire's stunt and called her. They talked for hours. By dawn, they had a plan. Test the Varel's patience with small, harmless disruptions. Not attacks, just reminders that humans weren't passive. In Geneva, the United Nations signed the final alliance treaty. Flags waved. Speeches flowed. Kalen stood at the podium, his blue eyes scanning the crowd. For a split second, his gaze locked with Derek's. There was no anger, no fear, just assessment, like a scientist watching an experiment unfold. That same week, Maya submitted a collection of American folk songs. Among them was, "This Land is Your Land." She included the lesser-known verses, the ones about private property and hungry people. The Varel translator bead flickered oddly when it processed those lines, then it skipped them entirely. Maya made a note. They edit what they don't like. Kyle, meanwhile, built a small device using Leo's shard. It didn't do much, just created a tiny bubble where radio signals bent in circles. He tested it in his backyard. His phone lost service. His neighbor's Wi-Fi flickered. And for 3 seconds, a passing Varel scout drone wobbled in the air like a confused bird. He smiled. They're not gods. They're engineers. And engineers make mistakes. In New Mexico, Leo kept watching the sky. He noticed the stars near the Varel ship still shimmered wrong. But now, there was something else. Faint pulses of light, too quick for the eye, too regular for nature. He recorded them, compared them to known signals. Nothing matched. He sent the data to Kyle. Feels like a heartbeat, he wrote. But whose? Derek, working late in his office, received a classified report. A fishing boat off the coast of Indonesia had vanished. Last signal showed it drifting near a Varel ocean outpost. No distress call. No debris. Just gone. The local government called it a storm. Derek knew the weather log said calm seas. He stared at the map on his wall, pins marking every Varel site, every anomaly, every disappearance. The pattern was clear. They weren't random. They formed lines, circles, a net. He whispered to the empty room. You're not protecting us. You're preparing us. But he said nothing publicly, not yet, because he knew something the Varel didn't. Humans had spent centuries surviving things that wanted to control them. Kings, empires, ideologies, plagues. They'd outlasted them all, not with force, but with stubbornness, wit, and a quiet refusal to be told who they were. In Portland, Maya sat on her fire escape, listening to the city hum below. The Varel ship glowed faintly in the distance. She thought about all the stories she'd handed over. The brave ones, the sad ones, the silly ones. The ones where the underdog won not by strength but by trickery. She pulled out her phone and recorded a voice memo. Just her whispering, "We're not your museum exhibit. We're the mice in your walls." She didn't send it anywhere. She just saved it. For later. And in Houston, Kyle powered down his device, looked up at the stars and smirked. "Really?" he said softly. "You think we'll just sit still for you?" The night stayed quiet. But somewhere, deep in the Varel network, a single alert flickered. Too small to notice, too strange to ignore. Aliens promised to protect Earth. Humans just smirked and whispered, "Really?" Part 3, the first person to vanish was a fisherman named Rick Dalton. He lived in a small coastal town in Oregon, not far from Portland. One morning, he took his boat out before sunrise like he did every day. His wife made him coffee. His dog waited on the dock. By noon, the boat floated empty, engine still running, nets untouched. No signs of struggle. No distress signal, just gone. The Coast Guard called it an accident.
Maya Ruiz heard about it from a friend who knew Rick's sister.
She also knew the Varel had an ocean monitoring outpost just 12 miles offshore. Then came the second disappearance, a hiker in Colorado near a Varel weather station, then a student in Tokyo who lived close to a cultural archive center run by the aliens. Each case was different, but the pattern was the same. No violence, no trace, and always within a few miles of Varel activity. Governments issued calm statements. Tragic but unrelated incidents. News channels moved on quickly. But in quiet corners of the internet, in late-night calls between engineers and linguists and retired soldiers, a different story grew. Kyle Bennett stopped sleeping. He spent his nights cross-referencing missing persons reports with Varel outpost locations. The match rate was too high to ignore. He called Leo in New Mexico. "They're not just watching us," Kyle said. "They're taking samples." Leo had seen something strange too. His telescope caught brief flashes near the Varel ship. Not light, but absence. Like something blinked out of existence for a fraction of a second. He recorded it, slowed it down. In one frame, barely visible, was a human-shaped shadow being pulled upward, silent and smooth like smoke drawn into a chimney. He didn't tell anyone but Kyle. "They're harvesting us," Leo whispered, quietly, cleanly. In Brussels, Derek Shaw finally got proof. A Varel maintenance drone malfunctioned near a military base in Poland. It crashed in a field. By the time Derek's team arrived, the Varel had already sent a recovery unit. But they were too slow. Derek's tech specialist, a young woman named Elena Cruz, pulled a data chip from the drone's core before it self-destructed. The files were encrypted, but fragments survived. One showed biological readouts, human DNA, neural patterns, even emotional markers, tagged with coordinates and timestamps. Another file listed subjects as specimen Alpha 7, Beta 12, and so on. Derek stared at the screen. "They're not protecting Earth. They're cataloging it like a zoo." He couldn't go public. Not yet. The world still believed in the Varel's kindness. If he spoke now, he'd be called a conspiracy theorist or worse. So he copied the data, hid the originals, and sent encrypted copies to trusted contacts, Kyle, Maya, Claire in Detroit, and a few others who'd been asking the right questions. Maya received the files in the middle of the night. She opened them on a laptop with no internet connection. As she read, her hands shook. The Varel weren't just collecting stories. They were collecting people. And not randomly. They chose individuals with strong memories, vivid imaginations, deep emotional ties, people whose minds held rich cultural data. Poets, teachers, grandmothers who told bedtime tales. Street musicians, the very souls that made humanity more than just biology. She thought of Rick Dalton. He used to sing old sea shanties to his dog. She remembered hearing him once at a local festival. His voice was rough but warm, full of stories about storms and lost ships, perfect for their archive. She closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. Then she opened a new document and began typing. Not a report. Not a warning, a story. A fake folk tale about a clever fox who tricked a giant by pretending to be harmless. She made it detailed, emotional, full of human quirks. She saved it under a fake name and submitted it to the Varel archive the next day. If they wanted stories, she'd give them stories, ones that hid truth in plain sight. Kyle, meanwhile, built something new. Using Leo's shard and Claire's noise-making circuits, he created a small wearable device, a bracelet that emitted a low-frequency pulse. It didn't block Varel tech. It just made the wearer's biosignature noisy, harder to isolate. He tested it on himself. For 3 days, he walked near a Varel observation post in Houston. Nothing happened. No drones hovered. No strange hums followed him. It worked. He shared the design online, buried in a forum for amateur radio hobbyists, disguised as a privacy shield for smart cities. Within a week, hundreds were built in garages and basements across the country. In Detroit, Claire organized a neighborhood festival. Music, food, dancing, and every speaker played a loop of white noise layered under the songs. inaudible to humans but enough to scramble Varel sensors. The local drone circled for hours, confused, then left. People laughed and danced harder. They didn't know why, but they felt freer that night. Back in Geneva, Kalen gave another speech. "Humanity grows more harmonious under our care," he said. "Your conflicts fade. Your fears quiet. Soon you will be ready." Ready for what? He didn't say. Derek watched the broadcast from a safe house in Prague. He knew the truth now. The Varel weren't here to save Earth from some future threat. Earth was the threat to their neat, controlled galaxy. Humans were too wild, too unpredictable. So instead of destroying them, the Varel would preserve them, freeze them in time, turn them into exhibits in a cosmic museum. Living, breathing artifacts behind invisible glass. The protection was a cage. The alliance was a trap, but the Varel had made one mistake. They assumed humans would be grateful. They didn't understand that gratitude dies fast when you realize you're the specimen, not the guest. In Portland, Maya met with a group of local artists. She didn't tell them everything. Just enough. "They're listening," she said. "So let's give them something worth hearing." They wrote songs full of double meanings, painted murals with hidden symbols, performed plays where the hero outsmarted a silent giant by acting foolish. The Varel recorded it all, unaware they were being played. Kyle sent Leo a new design, a modified version of the bracelet that could be attached to animals. "If they're scanning for life signs," he wrote, "let's give them a lot of noise." Leo rigged it to his dog, Comet. The next time a drone passed overhead, it paused, scanned, then flew off in confusion. Comet barked once as if laughing. In a quiet moment, Derek drafted a message. Not for the Varel, for humanity. He called it Project Echo. The plan was simple. Flood the Varel network with human noise, music, chatter, false data, nonsense, until their systems couldn't tell real from fake. Make Earth too loud, too messy, too human to catalog. He knew it wouldn't stop them forever, but it might buy time, and time was all they needed. As the moon rose over Houston, Kyle stood on his roof looking up at the black ship. He wore his bracelet, so did his neighbor. So did the kid down the street who fixed bikes for spare change. None of them said anything. They just stood there, alive and stubborn, refusing to be erased. And somewhere in the Varel ship, a single alert blinked red. Not an emergency. Just a whisper of doubt. A glitch in the pattern. A human-shaped shadow that wouldn't stay still. Maya, watching the same sky from Portland, smiled faintly. She whispered two words, soft but clear. "Really?" Aliens promised to protect Earth. Humans just smirked and whispered, "Really?" Part 4, the resistance did not march. It did not shout. It did not fire a single shot. It worked in whispers, in static, in songs sung off-key on purpose. It lived in garages where old radios were rewired to hum at strange frequencies. In libraries where folktales were rewritten with hidden warnings. In kitchens where grandmothers taught grandchildren lullabies that spelled out codes in their rhythms. The Varel saw none of it as rebellion. They saw only noise. And noise to them was meaningless. Kyle Bennett stopped building shields. He started building mirrors. Not real ones, but signal repeaters that bounced Varel scans back at them with tiny distortions. Just enough to make a human heartbeat look like two, or a voice sound like it came from 3 places at once. He called them ghost boxes. He mailed them in plain envelopes to post offices near Varel outposts. People picked them up, plugged them in, and never said a word. Soon Varel drones circled neighborhoods for hours, confused by the overlapping signals. They logged errors. They recalibrated. They grew slower. In New Mexico, Leo Grant turned his backyard into a broadcast station. Using parts from old satellites and a ham radio license he'd held since he was 16, he sent out star maps every night, but not real ones. He mixed real constellations with fake ones, added pulsing signals that mimicked alien languages that didn't exist, and layered in recordings of coyotes howling and wind through canyon rocks. The Varel intercepted the broadcasts. Their translators tried to decode them. They filed the data under cultural expression. They did not notice that the fake star maps formed a giant, silent middle finger in the sky when overlaid correctly. Maya Ruiz stopped submitting clean stories. She began weaving lies into truth. She handed over a traditional tale about a bird that outwitted a sky god by pretending to be broken. The bird limped, chirped nonsense, and dropped feathers everywhere, until the god grew bored and left. The Varel loved it. They added it to their core archive. They did not realize the bird's limp, matched the error pattern in Kyle's ghost boxes, or that the nonsense chirps were the same frequency Claire Mitchell used in Detroit to jam their sensors. Maya smiled every time she saw the story listed in their public catalog. They were archiving their own confusion. In Brussels, Derek Shaw met with Nina Patel, a sharp-eyed young representative from Chicago. She had been playing along with the Varel, nodding politely at their meetings, praising their generosity. But in private, she passed Derek encrypted updates from inside the Alliance Council. She told him the Varel were growing frustrated. Their data streams were cluttered. Their specimen collection rate had dropped by 40%. They blamed human biological variability. Derek knew better. Humans weren't variable. They were coordinated. Nina prepared for the next high-level meeting with Kaylin. She wore a simple dress, a calm smile, and a small pin on her lapel, a gift from a friend in Houston. The pin looked like a silver leaf, but inside was a microtransmitter broadcasting white noise. Harmless, legal, and just loud enough to fuzz, the Varel translator bead hovering near her. When Kaylin asked why human cooperation seemed to be slipping, Nina tilted her head with polite concern. Human tech is unpredictable, she said, her voice smooth. Our systems glitch. Our signals drift. We're trying our best. She paused, then added with a gentle shrug. You know how we are. Kaylin studied her. His blue eyes flickered. For the first time, he seemed uncertain. Your species is more complex than our models predicted, he admitted. Nina smiled. We surprise ourselves sometimes. After the meeting, she sent a single text to Derek. They're doubting their own data. That was the goal. Not to fight. To confuse. To make Earth too messy, too loud, too full of contradictions for the Varel to neatly file away. Humans had spent centuries being called chaotic, emotional, illogical. Now those flaws were their weapons. In Detroit, Claire organized a citywide noise festival. Not loud music, just layered sounds. Children clapping in uneven rhythms. Street vendors calling out prices in overlapping chants. Buses honking in coded sequences. Even the wind turbines on the edge of town were rigged to hum at specific pitches. The Varel outpost on the outskirts of the city went dark for 6 hours. When it came back online, its logs showed sensor overload. Claire bought everyone ice cream. Kyle received a package from Portland. Inside was a small wooden bird carved by Maya's neighbor, an old Vietnamese craftsman. Tucked in its wing was a micro-SD card. It held a new story. This one about a river that refused to flow in a straight line no matter how many walls the king built. The Varel had already accepted it into their archive. Kyle plugged it into his system. Hidden in the audio file's waveform was a map of all current Varel outposts, updated that week. Maya had smuggled intel inside a bedtime tale. He laughed out loud. Then he sent the data to Leo, who broadcast it that night as part of a fake ancient navigation song from the Pacific Islands. The Varel recorded it, analyzed it, and filed it under mythological geography. They never noticed the coordinates. Derek used the map to reroute supply convoys away from high-risk zones. He also identified a weak point, a Varel relay station in Iceland that handled most of the Northern Hemisphere's data. He didn't attack it. He just had a team of Norwegian hackers flood it with fake weather reports, love letters, and cat videos for 72 hours straight. The station slowed to a crawl. Specimen collection in Europe halted. The Varel began holding emergency meetings aboard their ship. Their calm voices grew sharper, their movements less graceful. They scanned Earth more often, but found only more noise, more contradictions, more humans acting strangely cheerful despite anomalies. They did not understand irony. They did not understand sarcasm. They did not understand that a wink, a smirk, or a deliberately off-key note could be acts of war. In Houston, Kyle stood on his porch one evening, watching a Varel drone hover uncertainly over his street. It dipped, rose, circled, then flew away. His neighbor, an old woman named Mrs. Lopez, called from her yard. They don't like us much anymore, do they? Kyle shook his head. They never liked us. They just thought we'd sit still. Mrs. Lopez grinned, holding up a radio she'd wired herself. Well, we're not sitting. In Portland, Maya gathered a group of kids from the community center. She taught them a new game. Pretend you're broken robots, she said. They wobbled, beeped randomly, spoke in mixed-up sentences. The Varel drones that watched the park that afternoon logged the activity as juvenile mimicry. They did not realize the kids were practicing how to look harmless while hiding sharp minds. Back in Geneva, Kalen requested an urgent audience with the UN Security Council. Human behavior is becoming unstable, he announced. Our protective protocols may require adjustment. Nina Patel stood and asked gently, "What kind of adjustment?" Kalen hesitated. "Greater oversight. Temporary behavioral guidance." The room grew quiet. Nina smiled, but her eyes were hard. "We appreciate your concern," she said. "But humans have always found our own way. Even when it's messy." She turned to the cameras. "Especially when it's messy." That night, across the planet, people did small, strange things. They left shoes on rooftops. They played pianos in empty fields. They sent emails filled with nonsense poetry. They danced in grocery store aisles. None of it meant anything. And that was the point. The Varel watched. They recorded. They tried to understand. And for the first time, they failed. In the silence that followed, humanity did not cheer. They just kept living. Loud, messy, and free. And somewhere in the dark, 1,000 people whispered the same 2 words. Really? Aliens promised to protect Earth. Humans just smirked and whispered, "Really?" Part 5. The Varel made their final mistake on a quiet Tuesday morning. They called a global broadcast, not through human networks, but by dimming the sun itself for 3 seconds. A soft, eerie twilight that fell over every continent at once. When light returned, Kalen's face filled every screen, his blue eyes solemn, his voice heavier than ever before. "Humanity," he began, "you have shown great spirit, but your chaos threatens not only yourselves, but the balance of the galaxy. For your own preservation, we will now enact Phase 2, cultural stabilization." He did not explain what that meant. He did not need to. Everyone understood. Stabilization meant control, quieting, freezing, turning living people into perfect, silent exhibits in their cosmic museum. No more noise. No more lies. No more smirks, but the humans did not panic. They did not beg. They did not even look up from their coffee. In Houston, Kyle Bennett watched the broadcast while fixing a toaster. When Kalen finished speaking, Kyle unplugged the toaster, turned to his window, and gave a slow, exaggerated thumbs up to the sky. Then he went back to work. In Portland, Maya Ruiz was teaching a class of 10-year-olds how to write stories. When the lights dimmed, the kids gasped. When Kalen spoke, they frowned. When he finished, Maya closed her laptop and said, "Okay, today's assignment. Write a story where the monster thinks it's the hero, but everyone else is just playing along." The kids grinned. Pencils scratched paper. In New Mexico, Leo Grant fed Comet a treat and turned on his radio. He didn't broadcast fake star maps this time. He played a recording of 1,000 people laughing. Real laughter, messy and loud, from street festivals, family dinners, playgrounds. He looped it and sent it straight into the Varel frequency band. The signal bounced off Kyle's ghost boxes, echoed through Claire's Detroit noise grid, and flooded the Varel network with pure, unfiltered joy, the kind that cannot be catalogued. Kalen's ship shuddered, not from damage, from confusion. Their systems had been built to process logic, order, clean data, but human laughter, real, spontaneous, irrational laughter, had no pattern, no structure. It was chaos with a heartbeat. Their translators glitched. Their archives flagged errors. Their specimen logs filled with warnings. Emotional output exceeds containment parameters. They tried to respond. They sent drones to major cities. They activated their guardian nodes. They prepared to lower a global dampening field, a wave of calm that would soothe human minds into obedience. But Earth was ready. In Tokyo, street musicians played out of tune on purpose, their notes clashing in ways that made Varel sensors flicker. In Nairobi, market vendors shouted prices in rhyming couplets that carried hidden pulse codes. In Buenos Aires, teenagers held a flash mob where they all pretended to trip, fall, and get up laughing, over and over like a glitch in reality. In Anchorage, elders told stories in native languages the Varel had never fully decoded, weaving in new words that meant freedom and trickster and no. The Varel tried to filter it. They couldn't. The noise was everywhere, and it was all human. Nina Patel stood before the United Nations again, this time with a simple cardboard box in her hands. She opened it on live television. Inside were hundreds of small devices. Kyle's bracelets, Claire's jammers, Leo's signal mirrors, built by volunteers in every country. "These are not weapons," she said calmly. "They are reminders that we are here, that we are messy, that we are not yours to preserve. She handed one to Kalen's envoy, who stood stiffly at the back of the hall. The envoy took it, confused. The moment it powered on, every Varel translator bead in the room flickered and died for 3 seconds. Nina smiled. Oops. Back aboard their ship, the Varel Council debated. Their models had failed. Their predictions collapsed. Earth was not becoming stable. It was becoming louder, stranger, more defiant. And the worst part, they could not tell if it was rebellion or just humanity being itself. They had no protocol for that. Kalen stood alone on the observation deck, watching the blue planet below. Cities glowed with lights. Radios buzzed with music and chatter. Children laughed in parks. Old men argued over chess. Nothing made sense. Nothing fit. And yet it all held together. Not through order, but through something the Varel had no word for. Connection. He turned to his command console. Prepare for withdrawal, he said softly. His officers protested. We have invested centuries. Centuries of watching, Kalen replied. Not understanding. We came to save them from the galaxy, but perhaps the galaxy should be saved from us trying to fix them. The order went out. The Guardian nodes powered down. The outposts sealed. The ship began to rise. As it left orbit, it received one final transmission, not from a government, not from a military, just a simple audio file, uploaded from thousands of sources at once. It contained no words, just a whisper, repeated by voices of every age, every language, every corner of Earth. Really? The ship did not reply. It vanished into the void faster than light, as if fleeing. On Earth, no one celebrated with fireworks or parades. They just went back to their lives. Kyle fixed the toaster. Maya graded stories. Leo walked Comet under the stars. Claire fixed a neighbor's car. Derek finally slept through the night. Nina bought a coffee and sat in the sun. The Varel never returned. Their name faded into myth, then into footnote, but the lesson stayed. Humans were not perfect. They were not peaceful. They were not easy to understand. But they were free, and freedom, it turned out, was the one thing even the most advanced aliens could not contain. Years later, a child in Chicago built a cardboard spaceship in her backyard. She painted it black like the old stories said. She named it the Museum. And when her friends asked why, she just smirked, handed them a walkie-talkie filled with static, and whispered 2 words. Really?